Want me to just jump in? Ah,
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Seattle Angel Workshop Series. This is the second of a workshop series with Jim Benson and Tony Ann, where we are engaging in the question of how we think about process a little bit. I found Jim's original book, the Personal Kanban, particularly motivating when I was doing startup weekend stuff. And we were talking about um, how you apply that in a startup weekend kind of context. And then he wrote this wonderful book, which taught me about Obeas, which I didn't have even the word for. So I'll let Tony Ann and Jim take it away.
all right. Well, thanks. Thanks, John. So in the last one, we talked about executing perfectly, and now we're going to talk about seeing the road. Um, all of these talks, this is kind of interesting because uh, we had version one, and now we have version two, and we don't have the same people. So I'll try and backtrack a little bit to let us all catch up with where we would be if we would have all been there for the first one. So here's our menu of things to choose from today. So at the moment, one of the things that Tony Ann and I say a lot is that if you can't see your work, then you can't see what you're doing. And so most companies will write down a plan, or maybe they'll discuss their plan, but they don't actively um, visualize the work that they're doing. And when you do visualize things, you process it differently. So let's say that a lot of us get together and we have a meeting, and we say in that meeting, we say, here are our three goals for our startup over the next 6 months. And then we have kind of an alignment around that. But as soon as we leave the room, we start to drift. We lose alignment. We lose coherence in the conversation that we had because we're all having different experiences. We're all learning different things. And that causes us to both remember differently what we decided to do and act on it differently. So we want to build visual systems that allow us to align while we're making the decision and then remain in alignment as we go forward by using those visual things to control our work. So as John mentioned, Tony Ann and I now 14 years ago wrote the Personal Kanban book. And that changed not just our lives, but the lives of hundreds of thousands of other people. It's been an incredibly successful thing for us. And the main premise there is that if you see your work and you limit the amount that you're doing to something that you can complete with quality, you can actually build a throughput so you can know how much work you can get done in a given period of time. You know the type of work that usually trips you up, and you know what you can promise safely to yourself and to others. So I'll go through this first line, and I'm gonna show a lot of pictures today because visual things should be visual, right? And the goal here is for me to just blather as much as I can with Tony Ann's help for like the next 30 minutes. And then after that, we will set up a lean coffee. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it, but you will soon enough. And once you see it, you will always use it. Trust me. That alone will be worth showing up for this thing. So if you have questions, just bring them up. But if you want to sit on them a little bit, go ahead because we'll have that Q&A session in a second. So we want to plan for easy things. We want to manage complicated things, and we want to strategize for complex things. And the reason for that is that easy things are things that we know the cause and effect. We have a pretty good idea that when we say we're going to do something, we'll be able to deliver it. So if I have, like right now, downstairs, I have a bottle of wine that's waiting to go to Tony Ann's house. I know that at some point I will be able to get that to Tony Ann's house if we can just find a way to schedule a time to do that. That's fairly easy. Scheduling might be complicated though. And so what we want to do is we want to have a plan saying these are the easy things we're going to do. We want to have a system set up to manage complicated things. So when something comes up, We're not quite sure how to do it. How do we react to that? And then lastly, do we have a strategy for things that are complex? And what that looks like is this. Let me zip over here. So we've worked with a lot of people that we feel quite lucky to have worked with. One of them was Spotify. We worked with them for several years. Just going to make the little box bigger here. And what happened at Spotify was they were using agile methodologies, which are okay. But they have a thing in there where when they plan their work, they divide their work up by what they call story points. And if you don't know what those are, that's okay. But basically, it's using a Fibonacci scale, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, etc., to give a number value to how difficult they think that task is going to be. The problem is that it becomes very confusing what those numbers actually mean. So at one point, I was planning with a team at Spotify, and they said, well, we've got these tasks that are going to be really easy. These tasks are going to be slightly harder. These tasks that are maybe slightly harder. And so like a 2 or a 3 are still fairly easy. So they go through and they plan all their work, and most of their stuff is 2s and 3s, and they feel like that's going to be pretty easy, but they look uncomfortable. They're looking weird. They're looking like something's wrong. And so I said to the team, I was like, is something wrong? And they said, no, 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 just, and they kind of mumbled some things. And I said, well, let's do this instead. Let's take the tasks that you have set up that you're going to do over this next sprint. Let's take them and let's list them out by how much they scare you. And so the system that we used was kittens were not scary at all. Crocodiles were kind of scary. Zombies were very, very scary. And then zombie crocodiles were about as scary as you could possibly get. And we did this for a couple of reasons. One is that if you ask people if they can do something, they're going to try their best to answer yes. And they're also going to try their best to convince themselves that they're super awesome at doing it. So they will underestimate the amount of work that they think that thing requires. And that is called that conforms to something called Hofstadter's law, which says that human beings will underestimate any complex task, even if they are aware of Hofstadter's law. So in order to get around Hofstadter's law, I wanted to change the conversation, or we wanted to change the conversation from how hard is this to does this scare you? Because scaring is an emotional thing and people get it. So they started putting things in these boxes, the kitten box, the crocodile box, the zombie box. And what we found out was that there was like no correlation between how fast you thought you could do something and how scared you were of it. But the only reason somebody would be scared of something is because they think something's hiding in it that's going to screw them up. And that thing can be political, it can be interpersonal, it can be because it's a difficult task, it could be because nobody's touched it before, it could be because it touches part of the code base or part of the company that's difficult to deal with. But what happened is like, something that was fairly easy, they said, oh, this is fairly easy. It would end up down here in something that was fairly scary. And then we could have a different conversation about that. So then we were able to plan for these kitten things. We were able to build systems to deal with the crocodile things. And then anything above a crocodile, we would have a strategy for how to deal with that. Do we mob on it? Do we pair on it? Do we do a specific Kaizen event or problem solving exercise? But we set up a visual system that got people to be more honest about how they work and what they would do. So when we say that things are complex, generally complex things are in complexity science, something that is complex is something where you are not sure of cause and effect. And you have to run a series of experiments to find out about cause and effect. And in lean startup, we super fetishize the use of experiments, but a lot of the experiments that we're running are in fairly known systems. So for experimenting about what type of advertising we're using, that's a fairly known system. So it's actually a very complicated task. It's not a complex task. But if you have no idea who your customer is or what they want, or you have a product that no one's ever seen before, that might be more complex.
Jim, may I just poke my head in here for 2 seconds?
100%.
You use the term honest, and I want to point out, Jim doesn't mean that people are intentionally lying about the work that they have to do. What it means is that cognitive bias kicks in, like that Hofstadter's law, like the planning fallacy. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are visualizing what it is that we are doing to include our capacity, so that we can be more honest with what we are faced with.
Yeah. And so actually to drive that point home, especially since we have a different group this time, I'm going to do what I always do, which is go off script. Even when I don't have an excuse, I go off script. We use a wide variety of tools to get people who normally don't communicate anything with each other to communicate very deeply. And any business that you have runs on information. So your business is processing an idea or information into something of value. How do we take this concept and turn it into something that is marketable? How do we take this really weird concept and turn it into something that is marketable in a way where we know how to commoditize it, but other people don't, right? So one of the first things that we will do, tighten this up a little bit, is we do something that's becoming a buzzword, and I kind of wish it wasn't. Is a buzzword called value stream mapping. And this is a lean concept, an initial lean concept coming out of lean manufacturing. But Tony and I use it in a very different way. So this group here is at Turner Construction in New York. They're doing a value stream mapping on the procurement process of Turner. They start at the end. What is the end of that process? And they work their way back. What is it that we do? The current red stickies up there show problems that they have along that value stream. And then you go in and you find solutions for those. And that's kind of the limit of classical value stream mapping. What we do is we go beyond that and we say, okay, where should you be collaborating with other people? Where are people not getting the information they need to get their work done? Where is your team acting like a silo and less like part of the rest of the company? Where are there stakeholders that are underrepresented? So we figure out the human element of that work. And especially in startups, it's almost all the human element, right? Even if we're automating things in the service of helping humans, or at least helping ourselves, sell things to humans. So this thing below it is a derivative of that that's used in lean construction called pull planning. And what happens normally on a large construction project is you will, let's say you're working currently on floors 7, 8, and 9 of this multi-story building. And in there, you're framing out the walls, you're putting in the electrics, you're putting in the plumbing, you're putting in the drywall. All of these things are happening at the same time. And so you have 5 or 6 different contractors on site at once trying to schedule their work and not kill themselves or each other, because construction is dangerous. So what we do in construction is we will backward plan over the course of 6 weeks, and we'll say, okay, what needs to happen? What happens before that? What happens before that? But each one of these colors is a different contractor. And then here where you see them bunched up, that's when you've got a lot of people on site at the same time. And there's bound to be some collisions there. They need to use the lifts at the same time. They have stuff they need to store. They have deliveries that need to be made at certain times of the day. So all of this construction that we're working on is in New York City. Good luck to you if you want to deliver a bunch of drywall at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So the drywall needs to show up at 6 o'clock in the morning, but so does the plumbing, and so does the curtain wall, and so does everything else. So how do we schedule those things so that there's a safe amount of materials on site, the right people are in the right place and they're not on top of each other. And you have no idea how many times I saw drywall go up before electric. And then somebody had to like cut a hole in the drywall, put in the electric, and then patch the drywall back up. And, you know, if you have a 60-story building, it doesn't take long for that to add up. So the cool thing about this here is now what this means is you've got different constituencies who are trying to figure out what they do and when they do it together, and when their work helps other people and when it hurts. So you have one way of visualizing that here, a different way of visualizing that here. And those things are vital. They're crucial if you have a group of people who are trying desperately to stay aligned in that weird middle part of a startup. So the beginning part of a startup is easy. You've got like somewhere between 2 and 12 people who are paying close attention to everything that's happening. And then as time goes on, people become more and more specialized, which means they pay more and more attention to their stuff, less attention to everybody else. Then everybody gets out of alignment, and then you start to have all of those problems, right? So we want to visualize our work. So I'll pop back over here again. And I just kind of talked about this. So I'm going to go talk about the roadmap next. So I'm trying to show some common tools that we've taken to use differently than might be taught if you're getting an MBA or watching a YouTube video on how to run these things. And so I will tell you like right now, so if anybody's used Kanban, that's us. So we're part of the group that invented Kanban for knowledge work. So I will tell you right now that almost any Kanban tool that you choose online isn't a Kanban. Trello isn't a Kanban. Jira isn't a Kanban. Asana isn't a Kanban. And I will show you why by showing you something that isn't a Kanban. And if I can find it here, where did it go? Oh, there it is. All right. So this is a Gantt chart. You all know Gantt charts. Gantt charts are boring. They're boring things. So if you're wondering why your team might set up a Kanban or a Gantt chart and then not use it, it's because it's boring as hell. So don't do that. But what you can do is you can take a page from that tool and a page from here on Miro, and you can say, all right, so we've got our loose Gantt charty thing set up, because knowing what you're doing is actually important. Okay, we can't just like do the agile thing where it's like, oh, every 2 weeks we'll kind of figure out where we are, because you will die that way. You will incrementally pave your own road to hell. But if you have a plan and then you handle that in increments, that's just fine. So we've got these increments here that are happening, but along the way, you have stuff that you want to talk about. So I'll just zoom in on this a little bit. And so here, you know, we've got AWS action number 3. We're in the process of implementing some AWS services. And here we have something that people need to talk about. So it says here, change in AWS features led to discussing in detail this Confluence chat with a link to the Confluence chat. Okay. Over here, work recently halted due to the realization that the platform isn't going to support the changes that we want in UI 6. We're currently swarming on this. We're swarming at this Miro board. Okay. You have one visualization that tells people what's going on and where things are. Imagine that. So where would this be normally? It would be in Slack, in Slack channel number 44, buried in 62 different threads that people have now forgotten about.
But how about the Gantt chart?
How about the Gantt chart? This is the Gantt chart.
Yeah,
here.
so like how does it differ then?
Because you're actually able to annotate it.
Okay, so just the tooling.
Yeah, this just sits here. There's no communication about why this, why that, what's happening in real time here. So this is always going to be so the Gantt chart thing, you know, you have like lagging indicators and leading indicators. The typical Gantt chart is kind of like uh like David Byrne in the video, right? It's kind of jerking back and forth. And so you've got some things that are leading indicators and some things that are lagging indicators. And there's always somebody's job to like keep updating these. But there is no commentary in here about what's happening. And if there is, you have to click on it and find it out. But here, you know immediately just by looking at this that something's up here. You know, maybe orange is the color for when things are frozen, right? So you look in here, you see that these two actions are frozen, and you actually have a reason why. And that is happening in the place where it's relevant. And so now everybody that normally doesn't look at the Gantt chart will look at it because it's a live roadmap of where we're going and where we're at now. And it is giving you that direct link to any ancillary or supporting information that you might have. So what would happen here is you would get like an email with like this picture in it, and then this would be circled and it would say, we're stuck here. And then it would have a whole bunch of stuff in it. And then you would lose that email. And then you have to ask somebody where that email was and so forth. So what we want to do is build a Obeya, which has a whole bunch of different visualizations like this in it. And so an Obeya is a room where all of the information that a team needs is located. And that room in meat space might look like this. So this is the room from the Coney Island Hospital project. This is the Obeya room from a different project, Columbia Business School. So we've got the team in here, and in there we've got images of what's being built. We have a Kanban over here for the procurement process. We have heat maps about who's going to be on site at any given point in time. We have time series data up here. There's safety information here. Back here around the corner, there's a bunch of Gantt charts. So they're not evil, but they're just in a place where people can get to them and use them.
I want to point out one thing though.
Yep.
Nobody on this call should understand what is going on these walls. The visual language that is happening or that is being presented in these rooms, in these images, is a language that the people in those rooms speak. Color means something to people, like at Modus, between Jim and I. If there's ever something orange on a board, we know that's a problem because we have a visual language that says always take off anything orange from a board first. So our eyes go directly towards that. What an Obeya is not, it's not a room where people are just pinning documents to the wall. They're pinning visual radiators to a wall. We don't make sense out of discrete data. So in that Gantt chart that Jim showed you, it's just data. And all of those individual lines require scrutinizing. But when you have a visual radiator, you're not looking at data, you're looking for patterns. That's the difference between those first two images that Jim showed. The second image definitely has its own pattern language for the people who are working there.
And different information requires different patterns.
Yes, Jared.
Yep.
So when you guys are working with these teams that seem to be maybe less remote based, do you guys find that it's necessary to do this in a physical location, or have you found that teams have adopted the Miro boards pretty well, or how does that usually kind of stratify for you guys? Like, does an admin team usually hop on Miro and you guys can have your Obeya on there?
Great question.
So this is the Obeya that we use. I'll just go ahead and make this even bigger so that you can see. Go over here. Come on, grab up there.
Because most of our stuff is on Miro, and we try to do everything remote. But I wonder how the adoption has looked for some of these companies.
So this is the board that we use to run Modus Institute. So right now, all of our interactions with Modus Institute faculty happen through this board. And so the answer is yes. R.W. Baird, Jimdo, Spotify. I could just sit here and list companies, but we worked with a lot of companies and they're all doing things online because almost no one is fully co-located anymore. But the one thing that we want to make sure at Modus that we do is that we have a way to organize the data, because in Miro especially, Miro has a half-life of like 37 seconds between useful information and incredible clutter. Miro just is the hell in a handbasket generator. So what we've done here is we have some specific areas where different things are happening. So we have the big worksheet, and this is where when people are getting together and swarming or pairing or working together on things, it goes over here. So you can see over here, we've got some value stream stuff going on here. We've got some funnel and other marketing planning going on over here and things like that. And when we come over here to the upper left-hand corner, because the upper left-hand corner is the most easy place to find, you find our actual Kanban with all of our work that's currently in flight and annotated by the people who are doing the work. And then you can see that a lot of these have little comments on them for things that we're doing. This is our product and project backlog here. In the Kanban itself, each one of these swim lanes is current things that we're working on right this second. Down below that, this is called style guide, but at the moment it's becoming a little bit more than the style guide, but we're constantly refining the look and feel and the pages and the sales of our classes. And so we've gone through 2 or 3 different iterations of those. This one here being the most recent, which has just now has its first version following this new format. Below that is our publications. Below that is work we're doing on trying to build the perfect calendar. Calendars are terrible. We had such a nightmare trying to get the calendars to set up. And then we have logistics and other things in here. But this is our board, and the group of us build and maintain this board. And we have a very firm rule that if it becomes too cluttered and people individually feel lost, they are required to immediately say, I can't figure out what's going on right now. And that has happened 2 or 3 times, and it's caused to cleansing of the board. But yeah, it's human beings need some sort of place to go to find the information that they need to act with confidence. And if they don't have that place to go, then they will not act with confidence, and they will do one of 2 things. They'll either act prematurely and stupidly, or they won't act at all, or they will act after the fact. Like they will wait until they can get everybody into a meeting and they will discuss what they should do, and then they will do it. And by then there's already been a cost of delay. So what we want to do is make sure that the people in any of our organizations that are professionals have the right amount of information to act as soon as they possibly can, as soon as it's safe for them and the company and the customer, that we want that action to happen sooner rather than later because of those cost of delay issues. And right now, almost every business runs mostly on cost of delay.
So I'm sorry for jumping in with another question. I can write it down.
Go for it.
But so we're looking at a dynamic dashboard, right, for these teams to work from.
Yep.
And there are places for them to interact with, and there are potentially places that are static, right? Almost
Yep.
more visual, or things that are only maybe updated or edited by certain teams. Like your team
Yep.
specifically, you guys clean it, and that really shouldn't be the job of anybody else's to keep track of everything.
100%.
But then you delegate some of those possibly to an admin team, and that may be some things that they're updating, and you just kind of quantifying or letting them know these are static, don't touch these. I don't know, maybe you lock those situations and these are visuals, and then you kind of delegate down into the swarm space where everybody has interaction. And so do you have these different kind of quadrants and spaces for their teams to work with?
We do. I mean, we only have about 10 people, so we're able to keep kind of tabs on that, but I can't show it anymore
The big
because
board?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So at Jimdo, and for those of you who don't know what Jimdo is a company like Wix or Squarespace, and they're based in Hamburg, Germany. And they're about 20 some years old now. Good people, 30 different teams. And what they did, or what we did with them, was we built what was called the big board or the biz board, kind of went back and forth, where you had 3 sections. And I'm just going to go over here and make a mess in this
Yeah.
board to show you kind of what that looks like. So give me a shape thing. So over here, just for um we have the biz board, and that's corporate importance. Keep putting those things over there so I can't see what I'm typing. Thank you. I'll zoom in on it so that it's easier to read. And oh really? You can't figure that one out, can you? Oh, that just happened. Corp importance. So what happens on the big board, biz board, is imagine that Kanban that I showed a second ago, and it has corporate initiatives or corporate strategy. It says like we want to grow by this much, or we want to attack these markets, or we want to be, blah, 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 whatever those OKRs or KPIs might be. And then after that, there's a series of projects that are going to feed into the realization of those corporate goals. And those projects always fall between a lot of different teams, right? So there might be 6 or 7 teams in the company that's working on one of those projects that's working towards a corporate goal. So what they'll do is they will just make it simple, and we'll just drop a Post-it note in there, and we'll say that this is a project. And then under that project, they will put a bunch of colored dots that say like the infrastructure team, the sales team, the legal team, and the blah, blah, blah team are working on this. So then they get an idea what the collaborative structure is of the entire organization on working on that thing of corporate importance. And so what's important about that is it means that those individual teams now, everyone knows that those teams need to talk to each other. They can't be little silos, regardless of how spread out they are. And so this Kanban sits over here. And then there's a second one in between that is the department board. Come on, Jim, learn to type. And the department board has things obviously of department significance, right? So now this board has its own projects and things that it's doing to support things that are in the biz board. And then over here, they have 1 million. We'll just make this one more color. Burgundy. We have 1 million. And these are all in a nice grid. They're not a big mess like what I'm doing now. But there's a huge grid of little tiny boards that you have to zoom in on. That's literally every single team at Jimdo. And then what happens is on every single team, you have on their Kanbans, you have things that say, I'm working on this and it relates to these things of department significance. I'm working on this. It has corporate significance. I'm working on this. It just has significance to my team, right? And so they are able to take their 300 plus person group, and they have just this beautifully perfectly laid out, incredibly neat system that has complete traceability from any task that any person is doing anytime, all the way up to things that the COO and the CTO care about. And what this means is now the C-level staff is incredibly well informed about what's going on in real time, and they're less likely to freak out about not knowing what's going on.
That also prevents the need for status updates, status meetings, status reports, phone calls asking, what are you working on?
Nope.
Right.
And Jimdo is an entirely globally based company. And that changed immediately in January of 2020. So December 2019, 95% of the people in the company were based in Hamburg, Germany. Almost, it wasn't even 4 months later, was it, Tony Ann? That like they had like 40% of their group was just spread all over the world. And so they went from completely co-located to completely not in a very short period of time.
And one of the things that we're also seeing, so Jim brought up that they were distributed. I have 7 tabs on my desktop with 7 different Obeyas that I'm working with different teams right now. All of those teams are distributed. On all of them, there's some type of visual, and we could show this to you during this call later. There's some type of visual about getting to know each other. And so it's got information about each of them. What are my hobbies? What are my dreams? What am I hoping to get out of this project? What are my offers? What are my asks? And people are jumping into that and they're putting little notes like, hey, I didn't know that this was, this was in your bailiwick. We should talk about this. It is fast tracking vulnerability and psychological safety with teams that can't get together and have a cup of coffee and can't break bread and can't have lunch. So that's what one of the things we're really seeing is this is helping with building trust and building opportunities for collaboration. Your question, I want to make sure, Jared, that we cover that with regard to compliance. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, as far as somebody like me who's been using Miro for a couple of years, it's a very easy thing for me to have it up every day. I know that that's my go-to spot. How do you guys, when approaching a new team, other than being like, hey guys, this is where we're doing it, get on board or don't, how do you maybe like integrate them into that process or using that type of toolkit?
But we recognize that, habits are not the easiest things to create. You need to have leadership support, right? That we're going to normalize utilizing this board. And the easiest way to do that is you have your stand-up meetings in front of the Miro board.
Yep.
So we don't talk about, what did you do? What did you do? We'll look at the Miro board and say, wow, I see something stuck. You want to talk to me about why that's stuck? Can we take 10 minutes and get that unstuck? But we utilize the board during any calls. We've likewise changed, we talk a lot at Modus about how language begets behavior and it changes expectations. We don't have meetings anymore. We have working sessions. So when you relabel something a working session, it suggests to the people that have been invited that they are not attendees that are passive, but they're actually participants who we are inviting so that they will participate, so that they will contribute to the working session. And in order to do that, they need to be speaking to the Obeya.
I'm going to very, very quickly answer Jared's question in a different way, and then I'm going to ask Matt what his question was. So Jared, what we do when we approach a new team is we go through something that we call a right environment exercise, which shouldn't be too surprising now. It is described in the collaboration equation book, and a right environment is an environment where the professionals on your team have the information and the ability to get their work done. And in general, the best people to set up that right environment are the people who are actually using it. So in Lean, there's this thing where you want to go to the Gemba. Well, what we want to do is we want to create just the self-aware Gemba. We don't want anybody to go to it. We don't want it to be just always on. And the Gemba is where the work is being done. And so what we do in this is we go, and this is actually a real one that's been somewhat redacted. This is one that we did with RW Baird, one of the groups at RW Baird. We did several groups there. But we go in, we do that value stream mapping exercise that I talked about before. So here are the stickies that we actually use. So what we do sometimes, what's a problem? This is a stupid thing to do. Who should we work with? This can be automated. And then they start to fill in those colors, and they get an idea as a group. What is it? How are they working now? How do they want to work? What's the delta? And then how can they get there? And this is important because no one is going to use an Obeya ever unless they are getting information out of it in real time that works for them. So the first thing that we need to do is get a bunch of people who have never thought about working together to think about that. And so people call that process, but all process is the agreement that we've made or that someone has forced on us about how we get our work done. That's all process is. So it's not, it doesn't require, process does not require a PhD, and we've proven that time and time again. So then we move on and we do what we call a charter. And the charter for most people is like, what do you want and how do you want it? And, can you use a hug? And would you like more cookies? And what we do is we go in and we basically say, why are you doing this work? Why do you care? And how do people get better in the end? What do you expect from each other? And what should people expect from you? How should you work together? And when should you inform people of things? And so when we ask questions in this way, and we go through these exercises, they now take the structure that they created in the first exercise, and then they start to humanize it. And then, this is the fastest I've ever described this. Then we do the communications plan, which is, you know what you want to do, you know who you want to work with. Now, what is it that you actually need to communicate? And then when you know that, one of the things that we do is we basically say, where's all of your information go to die? And it turns out that almost every team has maybe 15 to 20 different places where they put information. And then we can't figure out why no one knows what's going on. So we clean that up. And then we use the Obeya as the switchboard, the dashboard, the control panel for people not just to know what's going on, but where all of that information is being stored, right? So like right now, we're working on a bunch of advertising for Modus Institute. Some of that advertising is using Microsoft's designer AI. Some of it is in Visme. Some of it is in Google Docs. Some of it is in Illustrator and therefore in Dropbox. We don't want one tool, but we do want a conduit so that we know that we're getting to the information regardless of what tool it's in. So that is the very, very quick way of describing how we get to there with an individual team. So you asked that about us specifically, but most teams get there by first setting up like their first Kanban and then figuring out what they want to visualize on top of that. All right. Whew. All right, Matt, at one point you started to say something and then we just talked right over you.
No, that's all right. No, I appreciate, I see the value of all this collaboration and visibility and stuff. It's just like, as a technical team member, I kind of desire more structure and like being able to query these. Like, is there a way to see like just only critical stuff? Like, so I was wondering if you tried any other tools that might be more structured. Like we use Jira mostly, something like that.
Yeah. There are two things. One, the main reason you're trying to restructure that information is because the information isn't laid out in a way that tells you the story that you want to know. So I would guess that almost every query that you're running through Jira to find information is because Jira is such a challenging environment in which to find anything.
Jim, do you want to talk about how Jim Doe used Jira behind the big board?
Well, I can, but what I would say is that where I find something like Jira to be helpful is to keep track of information over time and then use it as a database that, again, like you said, that you can query. But once you query that information, what do you do with it? So let's say that you query stuff and you get things that are high priority, or they're dealing with a certain set of use cases that you want to deal with right now. You can continue visualizing that in the rather clunky UI, or you can use some sort of data shunt to bring that data out to a visualization that is more clear. So I'm not saying lose all data, because it's like that one thing I showed, there clearly, one of the things that I was talking about was storing documentation that people had written in Confluence. So the information can live there, but what you can't do in those tools is, let's go back over here and take a look at that. Come on, where'd you go? You're over there. Is literally slap something on here, like right now, where I could say, like right now I'm working on UI 6, and I could slap something on here right now that says, Figma blew up and I have no idea what to do next. And as Tony Ann said, let's say that orange is our danger color. So I make that orange, and then even when I'm zoomed way out here, if I come in, I see, uh-oh, something's orange. I have to go in and take a look at it. If we do something like that in Jira, we have to do a whole lot of different clicks to get there. And Jira is a standalone app, so I can't see that attached to any other visualizations that we might have. So if I go to our board right now, and I need to clean the board up so nobody gets mad at me. Right now, I know that there are certain things that we are working on. Look at that. There's a couple of things in here that we need to talk about. And I also know that this is our backlog, and we can go to that. There's no reason why this backlog couldn't be Jira. It could even be a Jira query that's just auto-populating these tickets. But what we want to make sure is that we're not locking ourselves into one type of visualization. So here we have a Kanban, here we have a set of columns, here we have some flow, some UI and UX diagrams. There's some flow charts here. There's some, this one thing is providing us, because of its flexibility, with all of the ways that we can view this information. And somewhere in here, I'm not going to go digging for it, but somewhere in here, Thushanthan, who is our documentation geek, he has a whole Confluence instance set up, and you'll find in here that there are all sorts of links back to Confluence or to Jira. So use the tool that works, but use the tool that works for the thing that it works for. Don't lock yourself into just using that tool, because I will tell you from just years of experience, you might like finding stuff in Jira, but you're not. No,
I don't love Jira. I don't love Jira. Don't worry. But I mean, it gets the job done. But it sounds like one of the main takeaways is you got a centralized place where people can go, like whatever that is, decide on it, and everyone knows where to go. And
Yes.
Miro or Jira or key.
And Matt, part of that is, so Jim mentioned during our right environment exercises, we do communication plans and project charters that will likewise be posted in the Obeya. And the reason for those is so that people don't have to ask, where do I find this? Where do I find that? Or even worse, John putting something in Dropbox and Jim putting something in Google Docs. So we're normalizing where we're going to locate and update information. Another thing about, and Jared, your question about having Miro to host certain things. The only problem that we've come across is that after a year, it gets pretty unwieldy. You do have to do some maintenance because it impacts how fast the board is loading.
Right.
That's the only problem. But for me, I don't come from a technology background. I want as few tools as possible. So I want my Kanban, I want my mind maps, I want my Google Docs, I want everything in my Obeya. And I
Okay.
pretty much live in all of my Obeyas.
Because I've tried to kind of make it maybe more of like a foundational thing where it's like you've got heavy data that probably won't end up going into the mind map or into the Miro board, because there's a lot of, like, if you got a company that's got 4,000 documents and
Sure.
contracts and this and that,
100%.
you know. So to me, I've been trying to push everybody into a Google Drive, and then the Google Drive is basically with hot links or important links move into the Miro, where I basically link them to the Google Drive, or you put that document and submit it into the Miro. So you guys have this like kind of like a Russian doll kind of concept where like you
Yes,
got
yes.
catch all,
Yep.
Google Drive, and that moves up into the Obeya, and then obviously then it goes to the front lines of people leveraging the tasks on a day-to-day basis.
But I also put links in Miro all the time.
Yes.
So I don't have
yes.
to actually weigh the Miro board down with documentation. I can
Right,
just put
because you're
links in there.
hyperlinking it to the Google job. Perfect.
Exactly.
100%. So you
Yeah.
use the right tool for the storage and presentation of a specific piece of information, but finding nobody ever had a problem putting stuff into the Atlassian suite. Everyone has a problem getting it out.
Interesting.
So we want to make sure that like and so the corollary to this, the physical corollary to this is the Obeya room for this particular team. But beyond that Obeya room, let me see. I'm really hoping that I can quickly do this. Yes. So on the other side of that wall is, and this was at the very beginning, it looked a lot better in the future. I should get a better picture than this. But on the other side of that wall is their team Kanban, which looks like this. And then oh wait, here's a better view of it. There, see? Time goes by, things get better, things improve, right? Oh, come on. Do I really not have it? So I could have sworn that this morning I pulled out an image which was that's Nicole. I swear I pulled out an image of Nicole's desk with her personal Kanban on it. And then one of the things about her Kanban was that it had a little thing on the side of it saying last 5 documents I touched. And then where they were, like who physically had them at the time. So it was a very it was a very analog version of this system. Other thing I'll show here are these two things. So this one here, this is at Facebook. We're in Cloney, Ireland, and this group lived between R&D that designed the new servers and hardware that they put into the data centers and the data centers. So this group had to speak both invention and standardization with people who only spoke invention or standardization. So a very specialized group of people. And what happened for these people was that they had all of these stickies over here were things that they had responsibilities for. So you can see there's like 1 million of them. There's like way too many of them. You can see here, the Brock here is like incredibly unhappy about the particular sticky that he's holding. He's just kind of like, yep, another one. So what we have over here is basically, do we want to keep doing it? Do we want to give it to somebody else? Do we want to abolish it from the face of the earth? And so what happened was that this team's goal in life should have been to standardize any work that they were doing and then hand it off to another group, just like they were standardizing the hardware. But they weren't doing that because they hadn't actually considered that should be their process. So one of the things that we find is that when you set up these visualizations, almost immediately people get a different and more realistic idea of what their work should be. And they stop doing stupid things.
We were in Canada, and there was a woman that had asked me for help putting together her Kanban. And so I asked her to take everything that was on her to-do list, essentially, and or her team's to-do list. And we put it in a backlog, then we pulled work over that was in process. And she took one look at it and she said, "Oh my God, I had no idea I was doing this to my team." Because she
Yep.
wasn't visualizing their capacity or lack thereof. They were completely overloaded. And it wasn't until she visualized it that she actually saw it.
All right. So I'll go ahead and do what you had recommended earlier, Tony. And then we'll close this off, I think. I was gonna talk about something else, but I'm gonna talk about this instead. So this is an exercise. I think several of you are from Seattle, so you're familiar with Limeade probably, because it seems like almost everyone in the startup community has worked for Limeade at some point. But this was at Limeade a long time ago. And this is an exercise that we did there that we ended up taking it to a lot of other places, and it's called the Doominator. And they had a bunch of tech debt that they were trying to prioritize. And they kept doing these stack ranking prioritization schemes. And at one point they had everything stack ranked. And I said to them, hey guys, which of these things is most likely to kill the company? And everybody pointed at this thing that was way down the list of things to do. And theoretically, if something stands a pretty good chance of destroying the entire company, you probably want to work on it. So what we did was we got these tables, and we wrote down all of the technical debt that they had on different stickies. And then we said, okay, this end of the table will kill everybody. This end of the table won't have any impact at all. And then we lined those things up, and they bore no resemblance to the stack ranking at all. It was literally like you just randomly stack ranked them. So it was clear that they were stack ranking them based on convenience or what would make them look good or something that was not actually something that would provide ultimate value to the customer. And one of the reasons for that is that these things that end up on this side of the table are usually the things that will have the biggest impact, but they also have the biggest expense. They will take the most time, and they're ridiculously politically sensitive. So people are like, I'm not touching that. So we built this Doominator exercise. We did that first bit, and they laid them out like this. Then we did the second bit, which was how long will this take? So one side of the table was it will be done immediately, and the other was it will be done, when hell freezes over. And so then what happened was people started to move the stickies, but they didn't just move them like, let's just say that right now they're set up right, quote unquote, right from doom to boring. But when they moved them according to these, they didn't just move them up and down, they moved them back and forth. So when they had even one more data point or one more bit of relevance in the story that they were telling themselves, the story changed dramatically. So when you're visualizing something and you're working out a problem, never use one, don't stack rank things. Even if you're stack ranking it with something like doom to boring, if you have only one axis, you will only get a one-dimensional view of the problem. But the moment that you add even one more dimension, it drastically changes the narrative of how people think about these stickies. And then when you have them, then like Tony Ann said earlier, you start to look for the patterns, right? So these things move around, and then all of a sudden you end up with like a constellation here, you end up with a constellation here, or maybe you end up with a constellation where panes 1, 2, and 3, or 1, 2, and 101 are suddenly some sort of thematic group, and you can do those together. But you get an idea that like this is going to have some amount of expedience and this is going to have some amount of value, right? And so that's another one of the reasons why I, as guy who can claim to have invented Kanban can say with impunity that most Kanban tools give you a very thin slice of information about the work that you're doing. And so whether you're tracking work happening in real time or you're solving a problem or anything, sorry about that. That should go like that. Tell the deepest story you can and in the most human terms. So the Dominator's asking you these things, and it's basically asking the same thing as the Spotify stuff was, just in different words. How do you as a professional see this work? And how do you as a professional think that we can act next in a way that will most benefit the team, the company, the customer, yourself, in no particular order?
I just want to say one thing before, Jim, we go to Lean Coffee. Jim just said human terms. When he kicked this conversation off, he mentioned in that prioritizing exercise, folks looked uncomfortable, and he used the word scary, and now he's using the word pain. We are knowledge workers. We go to work and we use this. This is arguably our brain CEO, the prefrontal cortex. When we are uncomfortable, when like emotionally uncomfortable, when we look at a task and we get nervous and it's scary to us. Why does that matter? Well, that matters because as knowledge workers, when our body encounters or when our brain encounters something that is scary, it can't differentiate between it posing a physical threat or a social threat, like overwhelm or I'm going to get in trouble with my boss. And so what it does, it shuts down all non-essential functions to get rid of that risk, to get rid of that threat. And one of the non-essential functions is your brain's prefrontal cortex, your executive functions. So it will impede your executive functions. So when you are in a state of threat, social threat, like fear of a ticket being too big, or you're overwhelmed, that you will not be able to prioritize, make good decisions, problem solve, invoke your rational thinking. You know, your thinking fast and slow that Dan Kahneman talks about, shifting to your slow thinking, because you're basically going to be in fight or flight. So those are some of the reasons that we want to visualize all our information, because it likewise alleviates the amount of whip that we are taking on when we are visualizing information, because it's easier to process it. Okay, Jared, did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a slight question here. So I've got a degree in psychology, and that's kind of what is the foundation of everything I do in systems, which is kind of contradictory in a sense, because systems are very systematic and rigid, and they have mathematical kind of properties to them, right? And I'm kind of curious, like, how much is system and how much is intuition, or what I like to say, like playing in the sandbox and just allowing kind of time and creativity to play out to create the solutions. And do you guys have like a balance or a harmonizing number for that? Because I've kind of just made up my own, and it's 80-20, but I don't know how realistic that is.
So this is what I would say to that, is that no, if you tell people to go off and just do stuff, they will.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help anybody. So all human beings do need some sort of guardrails to let them know what action is. And so the conversation, actually I'll go back over here and I'll zoom in on this picture. So this dude here, come on, get up there. This guy here in the center, this guy's name's Kevin Chase, and he actually kicks off the collaboration equation book. And we set up with him the first Obeya at Turner Construction. At that time he was a young guy. Time moves on for all of us, but he was a young guy then. He was in a position where his job was, when any project started, he was the guy who was responsible for spending all of the money. So the Coney Island Hospital that I showed some images of a minute ago, now the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Hospital, that was a $1 billion project. So in a course of about 6 months, Kevin here had to spend $1 billion. So you can imagine that might be kind of stressful. After a while, he was able to get Sal, who's staring at me while I'm taking the picture, to help him out. But Charlie Whitney, who's sitting here executively holding the pen and everything, he's an executive, right? And so every day, Kevin had to kind of run this gauntlet of running around talking to all of these different executives saying, I'm spending this, I'm talking to these people, I'm interviewing these, I've set this up, I need you to do this, blah, 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 blah. And every day they would give him advice, but it was a very adversarial system, right? They wouldn't have described it as that. Even today, they would say, I don't know if it was adversarial, but it was adversarial. He shows up and he has to defend his actions to somebody with more positional power, regardless of how much of a nice guy Charlie Whitney is. He's like one of my favorite people on the planet, still has positional power, and it still works that way. When we set up Kevin's Obeya, which is right here, this original Obeya right here, each one of these tickets with like a little red thing on it, it got better. This is like one of the first versions, but this was something that was saying Charlie Whitney needs to act, or Charlie Murphy needs to act, or blah, 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 blah. They walked by the room, they saw these things, they knew when they could act. They didn't need to meet with Kevin anymore individually each day. What would happen is every Tuesday and Thursday, they would meet in this Obeya and they would just talk about what's on the wall. And then if something was going weird, then Kevin would come get them immediately. But otherwise, the visual system had all those conversations with them and cut meeting time by about 80%. So Kevin and I and a couple other people are meeting meeting with all of the HR people from Turner Construction, which is like 60 people smashed into this little conference room, and they're looking at Kevin's stuff. And they say to Kevin, does this impact your work-life balance? Because he's talking about how this helps and that helps and stuff. And Kevin says, no, I work in construction. Nothing is going to impact my work-life balance. Our construction is what it is. We get to work at 6 a.m. and we go to home at 6 p.m. and that's life. It's not going to change. We said, but he says, Charlie Whitney sees this, Charlie Murphy sees this, Sal sees this. Everybody knows what's going on, and that lets me act with confidence. And that sentence changed my life. Not because it was just well worded, but not because he got it, but definitely the fact that like a client actually really got it was like super awesome. But the other thing about it was that it became abundantly clear that most people don't act with confidence. And so when we're talking about the intersection of individual psychology, social psychology, and the flow of work, what's happening here is that Kevin was initially swimming in cognitive bias soup, not just his, but everybody else's. Who was currently engaging in pessimism bias? Who was engaged in success bias? Who was engaged in sunk cost fallacy? The number of stakeholders that he had meant that all of those conversations, all of those psychological conversations were happening in everybody's individual heads, regardless of how they impacted the project. This system, his Obeya, normalized those conversations and decreased the amount of, we'll just say, psychological fluctuation from actor to actor throughout the group. So let's say, for example, that Charlie Whitney is having a problem on some other construction site. And so he's off for a week dealing with whatever that problem is. And during that time, he's not, Kevin's work is visualized like this. You can't see it. Every day he's like, I hope Kevin's okay. I wonder if Kevin's okay. I don't think Kevin's okay. Kevin's probably not okay. I wonder if I should fire Kevin, because he can't see what's going on. But now what happens is even if Kevin goes home at 6 p.m. and Charlie Whitney comes in at 6:30 on his way home to pick up some stuff, he can go in and just look at the room, reorient, and go on. And that is for us, the major intersection is, are we making sure that the people that are doing the work have enough information so that they can all act with confidence? Because confidence is the ultimate calmer of those negative psychological situations.
I just put a comment in chat that says confidence, literally, in a non-Kardashian, non-pop culture, the actual term literally, it literally makes you feel good. And it helps to optimize your brain CEO. All right. And so what happens when you're working with confidence? If there's two things that you take away from this presentation, is that there is a virtuous cycle between the process flow that Jim is talking about and the psychological flow that it begets. So
Yep.
I don't know how many of you are familiar with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who is the gentleman who popularized the idea of flow, getting in the zone. You know, when you have when you meet that sweet spot between difficulty, between challenge, and so what we want to do is we want people to get to the point where they have a sense of psychological flow as well as process flow. Jared, for you, because your background is in psychology, are you familiar with the SCARF method?
The what method?
SCARF method.
Scarf?
I would love to talk to you about that offline. It may be useful to you.
I would love that.
Five rewards and triggers for optimizing human behavior. And it's something that when Jim and I are building humane, successful visual systems, we
Right.
make sure that we have triggers in those systems that take into consideration the cognitive and the neural rewards
Yeah.
of the people doing the work.
Well, let me,
And I'm sure,
go for it.
sorry.
Jared. No, go for it.
I was gonna say, and I'm sure how you guys approach with the level of confidence and the level of connection that you make with the relationships that you guys have, that feeds off of them, right? I mean, these people are picking up on what you guys are doing, and they're reflecting using their mirror neurons, right? And you're basically doing chemical change in them at the same time. That's a totally different thing that needs to be layered over, obviously, these hardcore rigid processes and things that actually get tasks done. And is that, again, kind of coming back to the whole sandbox idea, is that something that you guys are legitimately planning for? Or is that something that just comes with experience, intuition, connecting, and realizing that is what's enacting a lot of the change in these companies?
Okay, I'm gonna try and so that's like a beautiful segue, but then you expanded the scope of the segue. So the good news is that I think I can turn this all into one perfectly drivable segue here. So this again is the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Hospital project, and this is after they had moved into their this is when it was being built. So this is in the trailer. So before they were ever in the trailer, they were back at the Turner headquarters, and they had like a little corner that was their office. And at that point, this guy that you can barely see over here in the pink shirt is named Chris Christensen. And at the beginning of the project, he asked me, he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want your project to be a project where, regardless of any problem that happens, that your team will instantly want to, or even feel obligated to, solve the problem. That there won't be a question of how do we do continuous improvement. It will literally just be part of that." And he says, "That's great." And then I said, "Okay, well, how are you going to do it?" And then he looked at me like, "Oh, you consultant." And and so then I left, and I came back a couple of weeks later, and he said, "All right, so remember that conversation that we had?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "I want you to think about what that would look like to you." And he said, "What it would look like to me is this." He says, "I am a construction engineer. He said, I can build anything. You, Jim Benson, you are a design engineer," which in fact I used to be. And he said, "So what I want you to do is I want you to tell me what the system design is." He said, "And then I will make it better than you ever thought it could be." And I was like, challenge accepted. And so I said, here are some of our design patterns. One is that the work needs to be visual. Two is that the watchword here is that we are always constantly working to make sure that there is never any delay in this project for any reason whatsoever. And that means that we have to be incredibly diligent about solving problems. So he said, all right. And I said, so the other thing I need to tell you is that one person can never solve a problem. So if a problem comes up and it's big, we need to get a whole group in, and we need to, you know, as Agile would say, we need to swarm. This picture is actually swarming. So these images back here are, and the other thing I need to just really quickly make clear is that every construction project is a startup. It's an entirely new group of people building an entirely new thing with an evolutionary design, with total unknowns about how the customer is going to treat you, and all sorts of weird that happens during the course of the project. So weird. These pictures back here are of the initial boreholes to put the footings in for the hospital. So this is literally right off the starting blocks. Coney Island Hospital, as many of you know, is just a few blocks from the ocean. So it has very high water table. They started to poke holes in the ground, and it was like the beginning of the Beverly Hillbillies. It was like, you know, water shoots out of the ground, and nobody's a millionaire, but this guy is now officially terrified because he was the engineer that said that you could drill these holes, right? So he shows up for this meeting, and you can't see it around the corner here, but he comes in with boxes and boxes and boxes. He's ready for a deposition. He's ready to get sued. And the problem is that this project is being built because during Superstorm Sandy, the original Coney Island Hospital basically sank. Like there were literally people floating in gurneys with no electricity, no water, and it was everything that Tony Ann thinks that Coney Island Hospital should be. And so this system, this new hospital needed to be built to withstand a 1,000-year storm, which they expect to get about every 8 years now. So we needed to build it fast, and we had no additional money, so there could be no cost overruns. So Chris Christensen's like, we can't redesign this, we can't sue you, but we can solve this problem today, because that's what we do here. And this guy almost burst into tears. He's like, I'm not getting sued. And so this room then, right from the beginning, became identified as the place where people go to solve problems. And they did it over and over and over again. In 2 days, in a 2-day session, we redesigned that corner of the lot, put in new holes. Everything worked fine. Everything was good. Solved the problem. He went home and basically said, oh my God, I didn't get sued. I'm so happy. But problem after problem arose because they're building a very complex thing. And so one day they get an incredibly complex problem. And that was, as you might guess, in January of 2020, all of a sudden, COVID shows up, and every other place, every other Turner implementation around the world called back to headquarters and said, what do we do? This group walked into this room, sat around the table, and said, what do we do? They came up with a plan about how they were going to manage this project during COVID. They wrote it up, they sent it back to the main office, and that became the blueprint for how all of the other offices dealt with COVID. So the psychology required from that is socially systemic. There is a social structure here between Nicole and Sebastian and Chris and Dave and everybody else that's in this room, where they knew that they had each other's backs. They knew that everyone that was in this room and in the rest of the trailer that they were there to do this thing right. And that, even though it's not a system, is definitely still a system, right? It programmatically, they understood that there was a rule set there, that was a social set of rules that they built themselves.
Also, when you're visualizing what your team members are doing, you're not making stupid assumptions. When we weren't visualizing what our team members were doing, and let's say we gave them a piece of work and we were waiting on it, and we're still waiting on it, and we're not visualizing what we're doing, they're slackers, right? We automatically make assumptions that they're acting in bad faith. But now we could actually visualize what our team members are doing. And what's been fascinating to me is watching other team members looking at their fellow team members' capacity and taking issue with it and saying, oh my goodness, you're stretched way beyond, let me help. That whole Yochai Benkler unselfish gene kicking in, because altruism feels good, right? But again, it helps us surface biases that we might have had prior to visualizing the work. Yeah.
It's like that concept of giving first, right? If you give first, it's gonna include the whole. It's gonna be a better outcome for everybody involved, and it almost saves like what you're putting here. It saves resources. It saves time, energy, money if people go first and say, "Let me give," rather than waiting for somebody to try to pull from me.
Yes.
It's a lot more of like a bogged down process trying to get pulled from than it is just to provide.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word pull, because everything that we do is a pull system, right? We never want to push work blindly onto people when we don't know that they or the system has the capacity for it.
One of the things that was interesting about two things. One is there are different types of visual controls or visual indicators. So the first thing is that because this was all the way out at the very tip of Brooklyn, everyone that worked on this project had a very long commute. And it involved 2 or 3 more modes of transportation, right? Very few people drove to work, but you had to really want to get there. And so one of the things they said was, if we want to get there that bad, we want a dog. So they got a dog. Dogs are visual. They're 3-dimensional. They walk around and they really remind you that they're there. So the dog was constantly there reminding them, hey, you know what? Turner as a whole has your back. The other bit about this is that this room is in the trailer, and usually the way that the social structure on construction sites work is the individual tradespeople never come into the trailer. It's like going to the principal's office. Because this room was there and it had interesting things in there, as soon as any meeting was done, you could find 2 or 3 plumbers just waiting to get in to see what was going on. And then, so those were going on. And after a while, Turner notices this. And so then they go off and they build this. Zoom on in there, Jim. It's a small one. On the ground floor of the building, this is like underneath the parking garage. You can't see it, but off to the right, left here, they actually built them a kitchen. And they built an obeah for the site itself. So the ethic, the aesthetic, the social structure of the system became and this is weird to me still, but at Turner, they have a concept called active caring. They're a 120-year-old New York City construction company, and they have a concept of active caring. I still can't quite process that, but they do. And so what we were able to do is just say, you know what, we're going to do this thing. So here we've got some calendar stuff going on. We've got different layouts and who's going to be in which different segments of which different floors at any given time. Over here, these are all typicals. So this is typical tin knocker stuff. We've got some typical plumbing stuff, HVAC stuff, whatnot. So that they can go in and they can look before they go out and say, what are the, how are we actually constructing this particular system? Important for a hospital, especially as people in Seattle know, because if you don't build the HVAC system in the hospital right, you end up with Children's Hospital in Seattle, and that's not something anybody ever wants to experience ever again.
Jim just brought up the term we. How are we building this? Prior to the Obeya, so one of the most popular uses of Obeya was at Toyota, was in the building of the Prius. And they wanted something that would involve cross-function, to get all these cross-functional teams together in a room to build this thing. So different parts of the organization, different departments, different levels into this one dedicated room. Before, you didn't see the trades interacting with procurement, interacting with this, became a we. Before, we were talking about the SCARF method, and just really briefly, I want to point out that relatedness is the R in SCARF. Relatedness, we have found, is also a reward trigger. So when we feel a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves, it goes back to that sense of having a tribe. It makes us feel safe, right? That's what this did. There was no longer an us and them. By having a room that everybody can access, everybody could use, everybody could input, it creates a we.
So I'm going to close up with a couple of things here. So the first one here is this seemingly innocuous thing. So this came from that Ireland thing. So in all of the server gear in any server farm at Facebook, if you pull a server out and you see that there's all sorts of things in that rack, different processors, different whatevers, all of those things are hot swappable. All of those things are, but in order to work with it effectively, you need to grab it right. So every place where you can like attach or detach something is called a green touch point. And those things are made out of this, basically it's a plastic that looks almost exactly like that sticky note. So when you open it up, the appropriate places to touch glow at you. And so with that group, one of the things that we did was we leveraged this term to find out, like, in your processes or in your relationships or when you're working with stakeholders, where are the human green touch points that you have where you can safely convey information, you can safely make a decision, you can safely raise an issue without upsetting people. I'm not saying go use green touch points, but what I am saying is that when you're working with your groups, you're going to have your own language that you speak. And that language is going to be both visual, the touch points themselves, and a language, like a physical, like spoken, written language. So one of the things that drives me bonkers is when people will go off and they will buy the Scrum guide, or they'll buy personal Kanban, or they'll buy the collaboration equation, and they will try and do exactly what the book says. And that drives me nuts. I mean, in Jared's world, it's exactly like saying, I am going to do exactly Lou Ferrigno's workout. Here I go. And then I'm going to be all better. First thing I'm going to do probably is rip all of the muscles out of my upper chest. But then the second thing I'm going to probably do is not work out ever again. So the reason that when we talk about process, it ends up being a double-edged sword is because people think that process is a product and not a set of dynamic relationships of a group that is trying to do something unique. And so one of the reasons why it's fun working with startups is startups haven't existed long enough for anybody to think that they're anything but unique. If anything with startups, you have to pull them back from the no, sweetheart, you're not completely unique. You're just kind of unique. But we don't want people to just say, you know what, we're just going to do Scrum, or we're just going to use this tool and everything's going to be fine. Because every group needs to know something different, because the problems that you face are emergent, and each of those problems or each of those opportunities has an also emergent way of visualizing and managing that work. So in the collaboration equation, that's an argument that we make over and over again. I tell people, like, half of the book is me telling people don't do what's in this book. do kind of what I say, but not completely what I did. So that's also to say, you know, you can use any tools you want. You can make any method of communication you want. You just have to make sure that that communication is right. And we love doing this stuff. That should be pretty obvious by now. And at Modus Institute, we do have a bunch of classes that teach different elements of these things. So there's classes in there about prioritization, about doing value stream mapping, about doing personal Kanban, about doing A3s. There's a lot of different tools, but anytime we teach a tool, it's through this kind of more socially practical lens of like, how do you set it up so it'll actually work for you, not how do you buy one, look at it for a couple of days, and then get buyer's remorse.
So that's a good segue into a conversation. I've used Kanban a bunch in novel situations, right? We go to a startup weekend, we have 10 teams, we lay out a Kanban for them, we tell them in 10 minutes, this is what it's for. Some of people have experience with it, some don't, and the end result is a rat's nest. Almost never does it turn into a flow. And then you take that Abaya that you had for the site Abaya, and the first thing that comes to my mind is somebody's got to be updating that multiple times a day. And if there's not somebody, you know, with the intent of keeping it up to date, that it will turn into a rat's nest as well, right? Even faster rate at which it will turn into a rat's nest. And you know, I in my organization have an ongoing problem with people coming in and saying that's not how the world is supposed to be organized, and rearranging it on a Friday night. And then, Christ, I can't find anything. And then I spend years trying to put things back to where they were, or at least to relearn where they are, right? And so there's a complexity in here that I feel like you're hand waving over. And I want to understand the hour by hour, if not day by day process by which this is contained in the opportunity to be useful, rather than the opportunity to do spaghetti on the wall and then it becomes useless.
Okay, so the first thing that I will say is the more that you have one person whose job it is to update or clean it up, the more likely it is to not be cleaned up or work right. So this is a dance, and you don't have the dance leader out dancing and everybody's watching the dancing. Everybody needs to be dancing.
It also flies in the face of this being a democratized tool by having a master. So that was one of the things that we were talking about with the actual Obeya Association people, is getting rid of the term Obeya master, right?
Yeah. So the one of the things to say about that though is like when I talked about the system at Jimdo, which is a corporate-wide system, everyone in the company is in there all the time, every day, moving their own tickets around. But they also have a woman named Sarah Gabsey who really likes to keep things neat. And so she is the one who goes around and stewards the system, but she doesn't update it. She just makes sure that the system isn't that, you know, if someone hasn't put one ticket in there that's the size of the whole board, and that like no one has done anything evil to the board. Also, the board itself is set up in a way where the predictability of the information that is provided, both in terms of what information is there and how it is presented, means that the conversations that people are having within their team, between groups, and as a company as a whole, all of that information is useful enough in that format that no one is willing to go in and screw up the board. Now, if an individual team, like let's just say their infrastructure group, their Wonderland, they call themselves Wonderland. If their Wonderland group gets together and says, you know what, we're having this real horrible problem getting these 3 pieces of infrastructure to talk to each other, they will start a separate board to manage that particular problem. And then they will link to that board through a ticket on the Kanban in that big board. So the mess can happen where the mess needs to happen, but the alert that the work is happening happens where the alert is happening. So in your situation, And I'm not going to say that we are immune to your situation. But in your situation, where someone is actively changing something and it is to the detriment of others, one of the operating paradigms of your team needs to be that when somebody pisses somebody else off, that it becomes immediately clear that someone is upset and why. So the beautiful thing about Modus Institute is everybody that's in there has gone through so many classes where we've talked about these things that it was just assumed that that would happen. At that one place in Turner, two things happened that made that possible. Three. One is that Turner as a culture in general operates either from complete disrespect or complete respect, and there's never anything in between. So when this group said we are going to operate from a complete respect model and put signs up around reminding people of that, this is one of the signs in the room here. That when things like that went up, they understood that it wasn't lip service, and they immediately started doing things to make sure that, so a submittal is basically anything that is going to cause a change or otherwise move forward the project in paper form. So you will get submittals that are like, we want to build this particular thing differently, or we want to change the design of this, or we want to change the materials here, or just a submittal saying, here is a sample of the tile that we're going to be using. And so what happens normally is these things are a big cluster nightmare of paperwork. And so what we were doing on this project was actively engaging in things that made submittals easier. And I have all sorts of stories about that, but I definitely don't want to tell them with 10 minutes left.
I
But
do
what
want to say one thing
Yep.
though, if we could just extend with regard to like, what do you do to a board or a room when you're done using it, when it gets too cluttered? What I have begun doing with my teams is taking screenshots for the very beginning of when I start their Obeya throughout the whole process, because we know that recalling past successes helps with motivation and confidence. So if a team is struggling and they think that they can't overcome this problem, I could point them to, remember when you solved this problem, and look at the mess you had to make to get there, and look at the work that entailed. And that's a really strong motivator, because it's their own work.
The other thing,
and when you say that the mess they made, it's a
functional
representation of every action and submittal and change and activity and decision that all got piled into a mess that then got untangled and turned into a done button.
Yes.
Yeah. And so and just really quickly, like the way that the submittals worked was, the biggest problem with submittals is that there was a hard silo between the design team and the build team. And so what we did was we went to the design team and said, how much money do change orders cost you? And they said, it costs us almost all of our profitability. And I was like, that's an excellent statement. Would you be willing to put your butt on the subway and go out to Coney Island 2 days a week and do all of the submittals there with the people? And so what we did was, this massive pile of submittals would come in, and somebody from the design team from NBBJ would sit here. The superintendents that were working with Turner would sit next to them, and they would take a submittal, they would look at it and say, this is easy, this is difficult, this is a nightmare. And they put them into 3 different groups. And what ended up happening was there was this huge pile of easy stuff that all they had to do was stamp and go. And then they were able to work on the other stuff. What happened before was that all of those submittals would come in a big bucket, and they would all wait until the worst submittal was solved in order to be solved. Right? So they would form their own rolling bottlenecks because the people at the silo, which was at the offices far away from the construction site of the design team, they would wait to turn in all of these things until the package of them was ready. And the package was never important. But also, if they were to send them over one at a time in email, then you get this overwhelming pile of email. So actually doing it physically there with the people was how we solved that problem. So there wasn't a done button. There was just a simplification routine that they went through that worked for this particular work. The other thing about this is right now, if I was evil Seacrest colleague and I show up and I'm going to screw up all of John's world, I would grab it all and I would drag it down here to trash, and then I would do something else.
Yep.
And then John would come in and say there was value in this trash, and he would move it back. So part of your problem is that you've set up a system where you can have destructive editing. And
I'm just thinking, Jared was saying he uses Google Drive, and I've had exactly the experience more than once of people not leaving the folders in a place, and there's too many things that are not the right color. And so let's make 15 folders and put everything in a folder and change the name so that they make sense. And now all of the ability to search for them is gone.
Mhm.
So handing someone the keys to a Google Drive does not feel safe to me at this point.
Yeah. Well, and so the other thing though is that let's just say in here that you have some tickets in something. We'll just zoom in on this and say it's just this is random Kanban number 7. And here, let's just say that Jim and Tony bios is in Google Docs, which it is. And then you give it a link, blah, 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 blah. Then that actually, after they change the name, that link stays. The link doesn't change. So they could change that actually with impunity. And if there was something over here that made sense out of it. The other thing is that you want the sense to be made in context and not in the filing system, because the filing system is a static context and not a dynamic context, and you use information in a dynamic way, not in a static way.
Cool.
Yeah. And this is, all of these things have just become available. It's like these knowledge management things were just impossible to crack before. And now it's very different, but counterintuitive maybe, but it's possible.
That's kind of why I'm thinking we're uniquely positioned right now in time, because business done post COVID or in the last 3 or 5 years is very different than business done 10 plus years ago. And
Yep.
these things are creating a completely different market. And that's why, like, it's weird. Almost every single business I talk to is running into these problems. It's almost like I want to be on Hungry Hippo mode, because I'm like, every single person is having these problems, and I have
Yep.
a unique value of leveraging Miro and these basic kind of system processes and psychological things to jump at these things, right? And so part of my problem is I want to get out there and sell as many of these things as possible. And then now I have the double-edged sword of, do I have the infrastructure and the team capability to actually produce solid efficacy in these projects? Luckily, I haven't jumped too far, but I see myself getting very close to that. My question for you guys, I guess, is how have you structured your team to be able to handle multiple contracts at once? And what does that look like? And relatively speaking, I mean, I get that there's a lot of work on each project, but also a lot of this stuff is automated things that are going on in the sandbox with their team. So realistically, are you guys very hands-on? Are you guys partially on and off? And how do you manage multiple projects going on?
Wow. If you had the dartboard on the spinner and just spun it, we could throw darts, and every dart would hit the correct spot. A couple of things really quickly, because Tony and I do have a hard stop at 2. because of exactly what you mentioned.
Because we are very hands-on and we have a
Because we're very hands-on, is that I one of the things that really became apparent to us over the last 10 years is that everybody's job is the job of converting unknowns into standard work. So oh geez, I just keep doing this. I'm
I
sorry.
know you do.
Here I go. I'm going to share my screen again. So you'll notice, even though there's nothing there right now, that in our Kanban, the Kanban ends with two things. One is recorded, and the second thing is standard work. And the thing that we do here is if we're doing something and it actively changes the standard work of the thing that we're doing, we won't just move it to done. We will move it out here into standard work. And then during one of our
Working sessions.
working sessions. So every morning here, we have at least a 1 hour, a 1 to 1.5 hour long working session where we all get together and work. Sometimes some of us can't make it. That's okay. But what we realized very quickly was we're spread all over the world. There's no way we're going to have any cohesion if we're not cohesive. So everybody makes as much of an effort as possible to get there for these meetings. We have other working sessions and we have others. But then while we're working, we're constantly figuring out what the standard work is. So if Thushanthan and Tim are just about to undertake a new live personal Kanban class, and every time we do that, we update the standard work for how the class is advertised, what tooling we use, what pricing we use, what are the giveaways, what are the things that we ask of the students. Every time we're refining that standard work. I just got finished going and doing classes at Ohio State and then down at Cal Poly, and both of those have their own standard work that go with them. And so the reason that I'm mentioning that and trying to get this all in before 2 o'clock is that don't think of work like the tasks. Think of work like what is it that gives you the output. And then whether you're doing it for individual consulting clients, whether you're developing something like a study at your own pace class, whether you're developing a book, all of those things just become their own individual packets of standard work. And then you figure out when to deploy them. And the more that work is known and understood, the more Tony Ann and I can ignore what Thushanthan and Tim are doing. Wow, I did it.
You did it.
Understood. That was great. Yeah, thank you for that. And that's my 80-20, I guess, is where I'm at with that.
You know,
That's
if you're
perfect.
interested in more of these conversations, we do free conversations all the time, these open lean coffees over at Modus Institute. And this is exactly the type of stuff that we talk about. Jared, you made a really great comment and you said social support is one of the highest indicators of efficacy. You know, people love collecting metrics. Metrics are sexy, cumulative flow diagrams and all of these charts. And you know what? Our number one metric is a happy face.
Yes.
Is if the employees doing the work are satisfied, are fulfilled. I don't mean necessarily happy, but they feel that they are doing a job that they are qualified for, that's stretching them to a certain point, that's giving them enough satisfaction.
And it's not screwing them over on a regular basis.
That hopefully when they leave work at the end of the day, even if it just means stepping away from their computer and going into the rest of their house, that they feel like they have been valued, they feel like they have contributed. Because if we can send them off to their partners and their kids and their communities, feeling good about what they did during the day, imagine the type of citizenry that we're creating.
Yep.
Imagine what we're doing for humanity.
You
know, I don't think that we can, I don't think we could suggest that, you know, it's just work anymore. We're dealing with so much existential overhead. Let's give people the tools at work so that they can feel that they are able to contribute to the healthy creation of humane systems. You know?
I love it. That's what I'm here for. That's what got me into this stuff. I mean, you guys are nailing it on the head. I'm glad I'm hot on your heels, and thank you guys so much for your time.
Awesome.
I'd love to drop into your coffees.
Thank you for fighting the good fight. We appreciate people like you.
Okay.
100%.
And thanks, John, for this thing, and hopefully let's get together and talk and see if we can figure out a way to make the 22 people that sign up show up.
Yep, absolutely. Let's do some interstitial marketing between here and then.
You
That
got
sounds
it.
like a
And,
plan.
we'll engage with that. So thanks
right.
very much. We will do the next session in a month, in August, May 30th. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Jared. Nice meeting you, Batch. Always good seeing you. John, thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Be well, gentlemen.
See you guys. Thank you.